Diamond Bradley was a typical teenager who loved singing, dancing, playing with her siblings, and participating in photo shoots. She spent a lot of time online, as social media and smartphones had become increasingly popular among young people. As the years went by, she actively sought out internet users to interact with, looking for companionship and entertainment. By 2014, when she was about 13, Diamond started posting more frequently, sharing a variety of content on her social media page. Her posts ranged from personal relationship details to invites for hangouts, and she often expressed her deep admiration for her family, especially her mother, whom she considered the best in the world. Sometimes she would seek her mother's advice, while other times she simply shared her thoughts. Like many teenagers, Diamond experienced emotional highs and lows as she transitioned from childhood to adulthood. There were moments when she felt a surge of confidence, and at other times she longed to confide in someone. While Doris, her mother, and other family members engaged with her posts, Diamond often craved the attention of her social media followers. In a small town like Spring Valley where activities were limited, her interest in boys began to grow, and social media became a kind of digital diary for her. She regularly updated her thoughts, posting several times a day. Her posts offered a glimpse into her evolving life and mindset as a young teenager. During this period, though she cherished her family, she sometimes felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Diamond openly admitted to lacking close friendships and yearned for affection, often sharing her deepest feelings with anyone willing to listen. Although social media only reflected a small fraction of someone's real life, it provided insight into the worries and thoughts that occupied Diamond's mind at the time. A high school student, she had recently begun dating a boy, and the two appeared to be genuinely in love. They spent a lot of time together and seemed like an adorable couple. School was not Diamond's favorite thing, and by fall 2017, she was aiming to complete her graduation through a special program by passing exams. She had a deep sense of empathy and dreamed of pursuing a career in nursing. While many viewed her as young, her ambitions were far from small. On January 23, 2018, her house was full of friends and family celebrating Doris's birthday. The night was filled with love, laughter, a festive cake, music, and the simple joy of being surrounded by loved ones. Little did Doris know that within less than a day, her life would be shattered. Around 10 p.m., as the guests began to leave, Doris told her daughter she was heading to bed. Diamond wished her mother good night and went to take a shower. Doris typically woke up just before 7 a.m. to prepare breakfast and get the younger children ready for school. She expected her eldest daughter to be up as well. However, that morning, Diamond had not returned, and her room upstairs was also empty. Initially, Doris wasn't alarmed, knowing her daughter liked to go out for coffee early in the morning at a nearby gas station. But as time passed and Diamond didn't return, her concern grew. Diamond didn't have her own transportation, and the weather outside was a mix of wet snow and wind, making it unlikely she'd be walking around. When Doris tried calling her daughter, the call went straight to voicemail, which was unusual. The lack of response to the family's persistent messages and calls was troubling, especially since Diamond was known for not causing unnecessary worry. As the hours went by with no word, their concern deepened. Her family drove around town searching for her, but there were few places to hide in such a small community. Doris, overwhelmed with emotions ranging from fear to anger, began to dread the worst for her daughter. Diamond had never stayed out this long without informing anyone, and the anguish was becoming unbearable for Doris. After exhausting all options, she reported her daughter missing to the police at 6 p.m. Authorities quickly focused on gathering information about Diamond's phone usage and contacted her cell service provider to track the last known location of her phone using cell tower signals. The response indicated that the last activity on the phone occurred at 7 a.m., about 5 miles northwest of a tower in a neighboring town. However, this only provided a broad search area without precise coordinates, leaving her whereabouts unclear. Shortly after, the phone either ran out of battery or was turned off, as there was no further activity or social media interaction from Diamond. Doris clung to the hope that Diamond's cousin, Giovanna, with whom she had been in communication the night before, might have crucial information. Diamond often confided her thoughts and plans to Giovanna, but she hadn't mentioned her intentions for the following morning. Realizing the severity of the situation, Giovanna revealed a critical secret to Doris. Diamond had a second phone that her family didn't know about, which she used to access the internet through Wi-Fi. Her family found the hidden phone in a dresser drawer, locked with a password and without a cellular plan. This revelation shocked Doris, who was unaware of her daughter's secret phone. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, she immediately took the device to the police, hoping it would provide clues about her daughter's disappearance. Investigators discovered that the hidden phone had been used for activities Doris wouldn't have approved of. Bypassing the lock screen, they found additional security measures in place, with each app requiring its own password. Despite this, notifications on the lock screen showed messages from several people inviting Diamond to meet up. The investigation revealed that the 16-year-old girl had been using her phone to engage in online dating platforms, which shocked Doris, but not Giovanna. Diamond had taken precautions, instructing her cousin to alert her at the first sign of danger, understanding the risks of her secret interactions. Doris had always been strict about dating, especially when it came to her daughter's interest in older individuals and the dangers of online communication, emphasizing the importance of caution and skepticism with strangers. Aware of her daughter's tendency to lie about her age, despite warnings from her mother about rushing into adulthood, Diamond crafted an online persona that made her appear older. As the search for Diamond continued, authorities expanded their efforts beyond the digital realm, scouring the neighborhood, checking nearby businesses and gathering surveillance footage for clues. In her usual coffee spot, only a low-resolution camera captured footage of a dark, unremarkable vehicle driven by an adult male. With limited evidence, investigators focused on this individual, analyzing the footage meticulously in hopes of finding anything that could lead to Diamond's location. Meanwhile, the family posted flyers in nearby towns with Diamond's photo and description, convinced that she had been kidnapped and taken out of town. On January 25th, Doris and another of Diamond's cousins went to the police. It became clear that Diamond had gotten involved in something far more dangerous than just socializing with boys. The cousin explained that while browsing dating sites, Diamond had come across pop-up ads promoting meetings with men in exchange for money. It was a transactional arrangement that intrigued the high schooler. Curious to learn more about how it worked, she discovered that some men were willing to pay women to meet them. No one knew how far her curiosity had taken her, or how long this had been going on, but it was clear that Diamond had posted ads of herself on adult websites. This explained why her lock screen was flooded with notifications from unknown men, responding either to her ads or her dating profiles. Doris felt like a failed mother, unable to even fathom, even in her worst nightmares, that her underage daughter would choose to make money this way. Diamond's brother, however, saw it differently. Their mother had always balanced strictness with giving her children freedom. Diamond likely didn't understand the gravity of participating in such activities and may have believed that she would be rewarded simply for going on dates, particularly with older men who she thought would be more generous. In reality, she was simply exploring life with the innocence of youth, unaware of the dangers lurking in those platforms, threats from people seeking to exploit the vulnerable. The allure of easy money for social outings was a risky temptation. Law enforcement recognized that many teenagers in the town were caught in a cycle of monotony, with their primary hobby being the digital world. Most guardians were unaware of this disconnect, leaving many parents oblivious to the online risks their children face daily. With the increasing concern, the local police sought assistance from the FBI to gain access to advanced tools to retrieve and analyze data from Diamond's main phone, aiming to trace her movements on the day of her disappearance. This collaboration proved successful, as they were able to track Diamond's route, indicating that she had been in a vehicle due to the rapid movement detected. A thorough examination of surveillance footage in the area revealed 13 vehicles, but the poor quality of the footage made identifying license plates difficult. An innovative approach involved deploying a patrol car with a dashboard camera at a strategic intersection. Over 2 days, it helped identify vehicles frequently passing through the area, narrowing down the list to a red pickup truck and a black Jeep, both of which stopped appearing later. With no immediate evidence prioritizing these vehicles, the police methodically focused on them, beginning with the 2. Additional surveillance linked the black Jeep to another location along Diamond's last known route, tightening the investigation around this vehicle. Meanwhile, detectives combed through Diamond's digital interactions, scrutinizing her communications on dating apps and social media platforms. A crucial discovery was the last message Diamond had sent on the morning of her disappearance, addressed to a 26-year-old man named Gerald. He admitted to having a romantic connection with Diamond but claimed to have stopped contacting her once he learned her real age.
On the morning of January 24th at 6 a.m., Diamond had invited Gerald to meet at a diner but quickly retracted the invitation, saying it was meant for someone else. He responded with a harmless smiley face emoji. However, a distressing message from Diamond followed saying, "I'm dying," which led Doris to confront Gerald with accusations that he had harmed her daughter. In her desperation, she was ready to blame any potential suspect. Gerald, however, provided a solid alibi, claiming he had been home all night playing video games, a story corroborated by the presence of a female companion. Reluctant at first, Gerald revealed that this companion was Giovanna, Diamond's cousin, adding complexity to the case. With no leads on Diamond's whereabouts, attention shifted back to the black Jeep. Additional surveillance footage captured the vehicle heading toward Putnam County, after which Diamond's phone signal vanished, either turned off or with a dead battery. The vehicle became a focal point of the investigation, believed to be critical in discovering what had happened to Diamond. Tragically, the urgency of the situation escalated when, on January 27th, 3 days after Diamond was reported missing, the Putnam County Sheriff's Office received a grim call that suggested a breakthrough in the search. A passerby walking along a gravel path in Grand Township discovered the body of a young woman in a ditch on the roadside. When the Putnam County Sheriff arrived at the scene, it became clear that this was no accident. The girl's death had been intentional. She had multiple wounds on her back, stomach, legs, arms, and hands. The victim was a young African-American girl, and the sheriff recalled a missing person report from Spring Valley that matched her description, prompting an immediate call to the area. The rural location was blanketed in snow, bordered by cornfields with the nearest house miles away. The body of Diamond Bradley was partially submerged in water from a stream running through the ditch, and the defensive wounds indicated she had fought fiercely until the end. Following the heartbreaking discovery of Diamond's body, the lead detective made the painful visit to the Bradley family home to deliver the tragic news. When the police arrived around 7 p.m., Doris had an ominous sense of mourning, collapsing emotionally before the news was even delivered, a testament to her maternal intuition. Daquan, Diamond's brother, returned home, hoping that Diamond would be found safe and sound, only to be overwhelmed by the harsh reality of his sister's death. The shock caused him to faint. The small community was deeply shaken, fearful of letting their children out and worried that the perpetrator could still be nearby, looking for another victim. To advance the investigation, the team focused closely on the black Jeep seen in the surveillance footage. They consulted an automobile expert who identified the vehicle as a specific model of Jeep Wrangler. Using this information, the police searched their databases for the names and addresses of Jeep owners in the area. After contacting numerous Jeep owners, they identified a house just a few miles north of where Diamond's body had been found. A woman answered the door and informed the officers that the owner of the black Jeep had moved to a nearby town. Although she didn't have a forwarding address, the town was only 2 miles away and had a population of about 200 people, making the search seem manageable. While patrolling the area, police spotted a black Jeep Wrangler in the driveway of a house. The vehicle belonged to 26-year-old Richard Henderson, who had indeed traveled to Spring Valley on January 24th and made a stop at a gas station near the Bradley residence. He was the person seen in the surveillance video from the gas station, waiting for a call from a friend that never came. The detectives closely observed Henderson's behavior and noticed inconsistencies in his story, as well as his facial expressions. The detectives skillfully guided the conversation, eventually getting a confession from Henderson. He admitted to meeting Diamond that day but claimed he had dropped her off at a mobile home park, which contradicted the location shown by Diamond's phone. This inconsistency raised suspicions of either theft or deception. Investigators proposed a ride along in the patrol car to retrace the route Henderson and Diamond had taken that day. They started at the gas station, passed the traffic intersection captured in the video, crossed a bridge, and headed into the rural areas of Putnam County. The journey ended where Diamond's phone signal had disappeared. At the memorial site near the creek, the scene was adorned with teddy bears and artificial flowers, contrasting starkly with the pristine white snow. These objects, much like Diamond, seemed out of place. When detectives asked Henderson if he recognized the site, he broke down in tears. Sensing the moment, the detective pressed him to tell the truth about what happened, and Henderson, overwhelmed, sobbed while avoiding eye contact with the memorial. Richard Henderson's account was brief. He claimed her trip to the isolated area was intended for an intimate encounter. Afterward, when he asked Diamond to leave the car, Diamond allegedly refused and instead brandished a knife. A struggle ensued, with Henderson claiming he acted in self-defense. He insisted that while trying to disarm Diamond, he accidentally stabbed her in the abdomen. Despite this, he said that Diamond remained aggressive, and Henderson admitted to disarming and hitting her, possibly twice before leaving her in the ditch. However, the autopsy revealed more than 20 stab wounds, including several in Diamond's back. Given Henderson's height of nearly 6 feet and her being twice Diamond's weight, his story seemed implausible. By the time the search for Diamond had begun, she was already deceased. over 200 people attended Diamond's memorial service, including family, friends, classmates, and educators from Spring Valley High School. Doris chose cremation, finding the thought of burying her daughter unbearable, and kept Diamond's urn with her at all times, even during the trial. During the sentencing, Henderson denied a plea deal, ultimately admitting guilt to avoid a life sentence, and was sentenced to 53 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Doris later confessed to having struggled with thoughts of ending her own life due to the immense grief over losing her daughter, but she held on for the sake of her surviving children.
On May 5, 1993, the weather was perfect in the small town of West Memphis, located in Crittenden County, United States. The three 8-year-old friends were getting ready at their homes to go out and play. The boys had met at Weaver Elementary School, and what brought them together was the local scout group, where all three had reached the rank of novice scouts. First, there was Stevie Edward Branch, born on November 26, 1984, the son of Stephen and Pamela Branch. His parents had divorced when he was young, and later his mother married Terry Hobbs. Years later, the family expanded with the birth of his younger sister. Stevie was about 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 64 pounds, and had dark blonde hair. He was an honor student with a promising future, but at that moment, he was just a child. That day, he put on a white shirt and blue jeans, left his house on his black and red bicycle. Second was Christopher Byers, born on June 23, 1984, to parents Melissa DeFeer and Rick Moore. His parents divorced when he was just 4 years old, and shortly after, his mother married John Mark Byers, who adopted him, along with his 13-year-old brother, creating a new family. Christopher was the smallest of the group, standing at about 4 feet, weighing around 51 pounds, and had light brown hair. His physique matched his personality. He was very sweet and innocent. He wore blue pants, dark shoes, a white long-sleeve shirt, and headed to his destination. The group was completed with Michael James Moore, born on July 27, 1984, to parents Todd and Dana Moore, and he had an older sister. Michael was the leader and stood out for his strong personality. He was about 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 77 pounds, and had brown hair. Before leaving, he put on blue pants, a Boy Scout shirt, and a cap from the same organization. He liked wearing the uniform even when he wasn't at Scout meetings. He was a real enthusiast. He rode on his green bicycle to meet Christopher and Stevie. The three boys headed toward the Robin Hood Hills, where they played all afternoon. Around 6:30 p.m., Christopher's stepfather started calling them to come home, but he only heard the echo of his own voice in response. After half an hour of waiting and growing anxious, Mark Byers decided to go to the police station to report the three boys missing. Although the authorities began a search, it had to be limited because it was already very dark, and the trees covered the entire area. Nevertheless, families and neighbors carried out their own search until dawn, but they could not find any trace of the three children. At the break of dawn the next day, the police started a more comprehensive investigation, led by the search and rescue personnel of Crittenden County. They searched every corner of the forest, but they could not find even a single clue. Around 1:45 in the afternoon, just when they thought all hope was lost, they reached the Robin Hood Hills, the wooded area where the boys had last been seen. Officer Steve Jones spotted a black shoe floating in a creek, leading to the largest drainage channel in the hills. He alerted his supervisors, and they acted quickly, searching the area downstream of the ditch. There, they encountered the most shocking sight of their lives. The lifeless bodies of the three children were at the bottom of a lake, having been tied hand and foot with their own shoelaces. Their right ankles were tied to their right wrists behind their backs, and the same was done with their left legs and arms. The horror did not end there. Both Michael and Steve had bruises all over their bodies. Christopher, on the other hand, had bruises and abrasions on various parts of his body, as well as cuts on his private parts and bite marks. However, this was not of particular attention to the detectives. No one could understand the magnitude of the crime. It had been perpetrated with a cruelty that transcended human limits. At the bottom of the same muddy ditch, wrapped around sticks, they found the children's clothing. Most of the garments were inside out, as if they had been hastily removed. Something that particularly caught the detectives' attention was that the underwear of 2 of the children was nowhere to be found, and one pair of pants had traces of fluid, leading to speculation about a possible motive of sexual assault. However, before drawing any conclusions, they had to wait for the forensic analysis. The case was just beginning. The investigation process was hindered because the officers had removed the bodies from where they were found before the forensic scientists arrived to conduct the pertinent studies. The crime scene was contaminated, as the chief of police was continuously smoking, throwing cigarette butts into the ditch. The autopsies indicated that Christopher died from multiple wounds that caused him to bleed out, while Stevie and Michael died from drowning in the ditch. The autopsies indicated that Christopher died from multiple wounds that caused him to bleed out, while Stevie and Michael died from drowning in the ditch. The hypothesis of sexual abuse was discarded because the studies showed that the wounds were the result of a knife attack, and there were no signs of sexual abuse on the bodies of the minors. Speculation began about the possibility that the children had been attacked somewhere near the woods, and then murdered in the ditch. Christopher's autopsy stood out from the rest. He was the only victim with drugs present in his system, specifically Ritalin. While the boy took the medication daily due to his attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the dose found in him corresponded to a level higher than that indicated by his therapist. The details emerging from the case were increasingly disturbing, and the townspeople grew more and more anxious, exerting pressure on the police. They were desperate for a quick resolution and a culprit to blame. Suddenly, it seemed as if a light had been shown on a potential suspect, a teenager who seemed to fit the criminal profile. His name was Daniel Eccles. He was 18 years old and had a substantial record of minor offenses, such as vandalism and theft. He had dropped out of high school and had been institutionalized due to mental health issues. The police, who had been speculating for some time, saw him as the perfect scapegoat. Eccles was always attracting too much attention with his heavy metal band fandom, his interest in pagan religion, his dark clothing, and his black hair, making the townspeople feel scandalized whenever they saw him. His family, being from a lower social class and having had interactions with social services on several occasions, was also known to the police. On May 7, 1993, Eccles was interrogated for the first time. He denied knowing the 3 murdered children or having anything to do with the case. He even agreed to a polygraph test, which suggested that he was innocent. However, prejudices persisted, and there was no concrete evidence against him. Despite this, the media and the entire town had already deemed him guilty. Public opinion alone was not enough to close the case. The manager of Bojangles, a local restaurant, contacted the police for the second time that week. After seeing the case on television, he believed there might be a connection to an incident that had occurred at his restaurant on May 5th, near where the bodies were discovered. At 8:40 p.m. on the day of the children's disappearance, he had called the West Memphis Police Department to report a strange incident. A man with brown hair had entered the restaurant, covered in blood, with muddy feet, a bruised arm, and appearing disoriented. He had then gone into the women's bathroom. A few minutes later, the man left the restaurant, and the employees discovered blood smeared on the walls of the bathroom. Officer Regina Meek responded to the call, speaking to the manager through a drive-through window. She didn't seem particularly concerned about the information and left without checking the bathroom. After the manager's second call, Detective Bryn Ridge and Sergeant Mike Allen returned to the restaurant, this time with a more proactive approach. They collected scrapings of the blood from the bathroom wall, but did not bother to question the other employees about the incident. The scrapings were never sent to a crime lab for analysis and were later declared lost. The lead was dismissed because the prosecutor argued that it was completely absurd to think that the person who committed the murders and took great care to hide the bodies, clothes, and bikes of the children would enter a public place covered in blood. Moreover, the injuries would have made it very difficult for one person to have killed all 3 boys alone. The police were desperate for someone to bear witness to the crime that they believe Eccles had committed. They interrogated Jesse Miskelly Jr., a 16-year-old with a mental disability, for 12 hours without the presence of his parents or an attorney. After numerous twists and turns, Miskelly implicated himself, Eccles, and Jason Baldwin in the crime, despite not having any connection to Eccles. However, his statement was inconsistent with the forensic evidence, as he described the boys being tied up with an industrial rope, whereas they were actually bound with their own shoelaces. Within a few hours, Miskelly retracted his statement, even providing an alibi that he was in another town watching a wrestling match on the night of the murders. But it was too late. The police had what they needed: 3 perfect suspects, capable of creating 3 distinct knots to subdue the victims, just as the crime scene suggested. The media frenzy that ensued portrayed the 3 suspects as guilty, further fueled by the satanic panic phenomenon sweeping across the United States at the time, where heinous crimes were often associated with devil worship and the resurgence of cults. The West Memphis authorities crafted a strong narrative against the 3 young men, labeling them as outcasts who had committed the murders as part of a satanic ritual. When Eccles' home was searched, a book with a pentagram on the cover was found. The police saw this as sufficient evidence to claim that the 3 teenagers were involved in a black magic cult, shaping the narrative they wanted to impose on the public consciousness. People began to come forward claiming they had seen Eccles near the crime scene. Detectives managed to interview 2 girls aged 12 and 15 who claimed they had heard Damien confess to the murders. An anonymous statement claimed to have seen Eccles covered in mud on the night the children disappeared. However, the real lead was provided by a woman named Vicky Hutchison. She said her son Aaron, who sometimes played with the 3 young victims, had seen strange things in the woods. Nonetheless, her statement was dismissed due to its lack of solidity. Vicky didn't give up and provided a second statement in which she claimed to have seen the teenagers performing a ritual, which later turned into debauchery, on the same night the victims disappeared. She alleged that the teenagers had abused the boys. However, there was no evidence of this on any of the bodies, and her testimony was extremely odd. Vicky committed to gathering more evidence and invited Damien to her home for a conversation. She hid a microphone and recorded every second of their talk. However, the young man didn't say anything that could be used against him. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, the police stated that the tape was inaudible, but didn't prove Eccles' innocence under any circumstances. Both he and Jason were arrested on June 3 of that same year. Jesse Miskelly Jr. was tried separately from the other 2 accused, providing several statements that did not match the facts narrated by the prosecution. The trial was heated, and an expert on false confessions stated that the young man had suffered from police coercion. They had taken advantage of his mental condition to tell him a version of the crime, and he ended up believing it. However, none of this was taken into account when delivering the sentence. On February 5, 1994, Miskelly was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. Although he avoided the death penalty, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment plus 40 years. The trial of Eccles and Baldwin was as scandalous as their companions. Evidence used included Stephen King books, black metal band flags, and psalm lyrics written on the walls of the accused rooms. The verdict was emphatic. The young men were part of a satanic cult and had murdered the children to carry out a ritual. Fibers and a knife found by divers in a lake behind Baldwin's house were also presented as evidence. However, it couldn't be proven that any of these items belonged to the accused youths. It was circumstantial evidence, and they were not given the right to appeal. Much of the evidence that the defense attorneys hoped to present was excluded by the judge. Ickles was sentenced to death by lethal injection for being the mastermind of the crimes, while Baldwin was sentenced to life imprisonment. When asked if there was any reason why the sentence should not be pronounced, Baldwin reaffirmed his innocence. Ickles, completely devastated, shook his head. The execution date was scheduled for May 5, 1994, but nothing was that simple. For the victims' families, the sentence had been handed down too quickly, and there were unresolved issues, which began the most mediatic part of the case, attracting the attention of the most unexpected figures. The young men were already known throughout the country as the West Memphis Three. The case aroused the interest of several prominent figures in the music world, whom Ickles and Baldwin listened to. Among them was Pearl Jam's lead singer, Eddie Vedder, who helped raise money for their legal defense. Natalie Maines, the lead singer of the Dixie Chicks, also joined the cause of the trio. The metal band Corrosion of Conformity included a song inspired by the case called Free the Three in their album Wise Blood. But it wasn't just musicians who were part of the media defense. The young men also received support from Johnny Depp and several film directors. In 2007, with significantly more advanced technology, new DNA tests were conducted. These tests showed that there was no trace of the three accused on the bodies of the children. The bite marks also did not match any of them. Most shockingly, the results suggested the presence of other individuals at the crime scene. A hair found on one of the shoelaces of Michael Moore was consistent with the DNA of Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather. Hobbs had a criminal record and was known in the town for having a long history of mistreatment, including assaulting his wife, allegations of hitting minors, and attacks on neighbors. Another hair found near the crime scene on a tree stump was consistent with the DNA of a friend of Hobbs, named David Jacoby. Both claimed to have been together on the night of the murders. Hobbs emphasized that he believed the guilty parties were already behind bars. However, 3 witnesses presented sworn statements claiming they saw Hobbs with the children on the night they disappeared. The police did not initiate legal actions against him, but the media did. Peter Jackson, the renowned director, began producing a documentary with the goal of reconstructing the events, pointing at Stevie's stepfather as the murderer. New testimonies were collected. Jo Lynn McCarty, Michael Moore's mother, claimed she saw Hobbs washing clothes on the night of the murders, presumably to clean mud off his clothes. Additionally, a cherished pocket knife belonging to Stevie, which he almost always carried with him, was later found among Hobbs' possessions. Finally, and perhaps most damningly, 3 young men claimed that a nephew of Hobbs told them his uncle had been the murderer, but it was a family secret. Opinions among the victims' families began to diverge. The stepfather of Christopher Byers started to suspect Hobbs, even calling him a child murderer. However, Todd Moore believed that the evidence against Hobbs was not convincing. He pointed out that his son spent a lot of time at Stevie's house and could have easily picked up a hair with DNA on his shoelaces on one of those occasions. The tipping point came with the reappearance of Vicki Hutchison, who admitted that she had agreed to collaborate with the police in exchange for a $30,000 reward. She was supposed to provide false information to implicate Ickles. This revelation indicated it was time to redeem the West Memphis Three. In 2010, 17 years after the crime, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered that the DNA evidence must lead to a new trial. The West Memphis Three reached an agreement with the prosecution, adhering to the Alford plea, which allowed them to assert their innocence, while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. On August 19, 2011, they were released on a suspended sentence of 10 years after having spent 18 years in prison. However, they remain on probation and could be incarcerated again for more than 21 years if they reoffend. The procedure allowed the accused to freely express that they are innocent, even though their official record still lists them as guilty. In interviews given after their release, Baldwin stated that he had been reluctant to plead guilty to crimes he did not commit, but he did so to spare Ickles from the death penalty. Although the families of two of the victims came to believe that the trio was innocent, a spectator shouted "murderers" at the three as they left the courthouse. It would be very difficult to undo the scandal that the West Memphis police had constructed. In a press conference, the three, now adults, stated that their main concern was clearing their names. In 2013, a new version of the story emerged from Billy Wayne Stewart, a self-confessed drug dealer, and Benny Guy, a convicted felon. The story was not firsthand, but had reached them through Buddy Lucas, a teenager from the town. On May 5, 1993, Buddy had gone out with Terry Hobbs, David Jacoby, and his friend John Mark Byers to buy marijuana from Stewart. They then got into Hobbs' truck and drove around the city, smoking and drinking whiskey. They reached a wooded area, and at that moment, Hobbs asked the two teenagers to get out and fight while he and Jacoby watched in a fetishistic act. It was unclear whether this led to any intimate activity. During the course of that afternoon, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch appeared on their bicycles. Upon realizing they were witnessing something they shouldn't, they decided to leave, but it was too late. Hobbs shouted at his companions to stop the boys, while Jacoby hit one of them. That's when the attack occurred, resulting in the mutilation of Christopher's genitals. The other boys had seen too much, so they decided to kill them all. The clothing and bodies of the boys were collected and dragged to the water, and their bicycles were thrown into the swamp. According to Stewart, when he tried to call the West Memphis police investigator to tell him Buddy Lucas' story, he didn't even bother to return the calls. These statements are public knowledge, but the case remains closed. It is unclear if the authorities prefer to leave the case as a collective myth rather than seeking true justice for the victims and their families. In a small American town called Bristol, Tennessee, Johnia Berry was born on August 26, 1983. She was a happy and friendly person who had many friends and loved to have fun at parties. When she was in school, she was also part of the local cheerleading team. After finishing high school, Johnia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. During her college years, she met Jason White, and they became a couple, eventually getting engaged right before they graduated. In late 2004, when she was 21 years old, Johnia decided to get a master's degree in psychology. This led her to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, for her studies. While studying, she worked part-time at a children's educational center and discovered her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, continued his studies in a different state, working towards a law degree. Even though they were far apart, they stayed in touch and planned their wedding. In Knoxville, Johnia initially stayed in her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They both went to college together and later moved to Knoxville. They shared an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and Jason let Johnia stay there until she found her own place. Johnia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing work at the store, Johnia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back home, she wrapped presents for the children at the educational center, talked to her neighbor, and then went to her room. She also spoke to her boyfriend on the phone before going to bed. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami heard a scream from a woman. He thought Johnia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, he found a stranger with a knife. The stranger attacked Jason, and they had a fight. Eventually, Jason managed to push the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they called 911. Jason explained what had happened to the police when they arrived. The police went to their apartment and found Johnia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive but barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, she could only give weak clues. The police searched the whole building and the area nearby, but they couldn't find the attacker. They rushed Johnia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her, even though they tried their best. The doctor said she had more than 20 stab wounds, and it was very unlikely she could survive. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but only one was very serious. He got medical help, and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives started to investigate the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, showing that Johnia had tried to ask her neighbors for help, but no one had opened their doors. Right next to Johnia's room, they found the murder weapon, which turned out to be a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such force that it got bent and damaged. The police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Johnia had left through the front door, the detectives thought the most likely explanation was that the killer had escaped through the back door. In Jason's room, they discovered another clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he followed Jason and attacked him. Because of the brutal way the attacker had taken Johnia's life, the police suspected that the motive behind the crime was personal. At first, the detectives started looking into Johnia's boyfriend, even though he was far away, about 1,000 kilometers from Knoxville. But all his friends and family said that Johnia and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship, and he had no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about Johnia's death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He said that after hearing the news, he fainted and took a long time to recover. He was in no condition to do anything, so he had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. The investigators carefully checked his alibi and realized that he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning. So, they ruled him out as a suspect and turned their attention to Johnia's neighbor instead. In contrast to the victim's boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi and had been inside the apartment with her, raising suspicions that he might be the culprit. Friends and family of Johnia were also skeptical of him. Some believed he could be the likely killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Johnia behind. This suspicion ran so deep that the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Shortly after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his initial account. He heard screams, saw an unfamiliar man, and was attacked. After managing to fend off the attacker, Jason rushed to the front door and out into the street, seeking help from the neighbors. He believed that Johnia had also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screams. However, the police had reservations about accepting this version of events. What initially raised doubts about Jason were his injuries. 7 of the 8 wounds were superficial, and the last one on his right arm could have been acquired either while defending himself or during an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the person responsible might have been inside already. Jason claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had indeed exited through the back door, it would explain the presence of bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, further raising suspicions against him. Moreover, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to level various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test of him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him leading questions, and at the end of the session, they informed him that he had failed the test, indicating that he was providing false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still on the loose. However, the detectives remained unconvinced. Nevertheless, they couldn't charge him with the murder due to the lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for laboratory experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment, and an unexpected twist soon emerged. During their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they discovered 3 DNA samples, those of the deceased girl, Jason, and an unidentified man. Additionally, the unknown man's DNA was found in Johnia's room, on the back door handle, and on the staircase used by the criminal to exit onto the street. Furthermore, they uncovered a fingerprint on the knife handle, marked by the victim's blood, that did not match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no matches. Even though investigators had ruled out Jason as a suspect, public opinion continued to cast doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. Furthermore, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development soon came to light. It was revealed that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was no indication that Jason was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to illegal substances. It had been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been initially underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck, with little hope for a full recovery. Due to these inaccuracies in police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason facing severe financial hardship. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they began questioning Jason as a witness. From his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he exited the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Johnia's room: a cap, along with discs, and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. According to him, none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police received hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One lead stood out to the investigators. They learned about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police initiated a search for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and fingerprints from Michael and sent them to the experts for analysis. Meanwhile, they interrogated him, and during this process, they received an unexpected revelation. Michael quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Johnia's apartment that night. According to his account, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Johnia. However, the detectives soon began to doubt Michael's story. Firstly, The details he provided didn't align with the actual events. Secondly, there was no evidence of the presence of two strangers at the crime scene. The laboratory results further confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same held true for his shoes. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room. Ultimately, the police concluded that Michael had fabricated the story. While it may sound unusual, such false admissions occur relatively frequently in high-profile cases. Some individuals falsely claim guilt for various reasons, including seeking attention or hoping for a reward for information. It remains unclear what motivated Michael, but his story turned out to be entirely untrue. Following that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward had been offered for information leading to the case's resolution. As each month passed, the reward amount increased, and by December 2005, 1 year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. Adding to this, the state governor chipped in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the abundance of leads, all of them eventually led to dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victim's parents decided to take action by seeking changes in state legislation. They found it perplexing that the fingerprints and DNA of the murderer were not in any databases. Given the brutality of the crime, the parents refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. Johnia's parents were determined to change this. They played an active role in crafting a new law that mandated the collection of these samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was enacted in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even though he had a history of run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Johnia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night, he had intended to steal Johnia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone, and it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Johnia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, no evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability. His DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Johnia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Johnia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Johnia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Johnia's relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Johnia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned Noah. However, they found no evidence implicating him. Johnia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts.